Welcome to Digital Momentum, the Retail Growth Podcast. I'm Mike Ryan, Head of Retail Insights at Smarter E-commerce. This show offers conversational interviews with leaders in digital marketing, digital transformation, and e-commerce growth. Today, I'm joined by Birgit de Vries, owner of Golfbreker Consulting and acting head of digital at a market-leading pharmaceutical retailer. I got to know Birgit through some client conversations around activating profit data within marketing campaigns, and we had such a great talk, I had to bring her on here. She co-launched Reprise Digital and is a veteran in themes like digital transformation, change management, and building and equipping teams to scale. So let's get into it. Thanks for joining. Birgit is a consultant in digital, and she has some really interesting experience and perspectives to share with us today. So Birgit, could you tell us quickly about, maybe you could introduce yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Hey, Mike. So glad that I am invited here. Thank you. I'm up to some really exciting stuff. I have a main assignment at a big pharmaceutical company. We can talk about that later. And then on the other side, I'm also working on a podcast myself, actually.
Oh, cool.
Very exciting stuff on that. And I have a lot of other ideas where I want to help a lot of companies. And I'm trying to find out a perfect business model for that. So.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I want to, I had a kind of a deep dive into your CV, and so I wanted to just jump into some questions about milestones along your career, and this is something that I studied literature, and I've ended up in a totally different area in my career, and I noticed that you studied history and art history.
Yeah.
So just wondering, do you still like think of that in your career? Are there things that you draw on from back then?
Well, to me, I have two big passions in my life. No, a lot of more, but in essence, there is the history, the story of the people and the society and how everything evolves. That's the main reason why I started studying history. And on the other part, I have also a main passion on everything marketing, economics, how the world functions today, etc. So I started studying history at that point. Yeah, and the part that I'm using still from the history is the fact that I have the ability to never give up, because I know that if you keep on searching, you will always find elements that can tell you about something about history, etc. But if you keep on searching within the marketing for solutions for how can I understand the audiences better, etc., if you never give up, then you find the little gems. Mm-hmm. So that's an ability that I have. Also, to search for the story behind the data. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very important skill in these days, not just showing the numbers of the CVRs, CTRs, etc., but really explaining why is this evolving the way it is evolving. And that's also something that I learned back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think storytelling with data and this contextual element is so important.
Absolutely.
Data by itself is valueless. It's just what we do with it.
Yeah, I totally agree on that.
And we were talking before we were recording. We were talking a little bit about, we can maybe get to this later, but the death of third-party tracking, or the death of the cookie, and maybe there's a little history repeating itself, what's going to occur in the market. But, yeah. So that's an interesting connection too. And just on the topic of education, I noticed that in the last few years you returned to business school. What prompted that, or how has that been?
Well, I have a very big hunger for knowledge. So if I keep on repeating on doing what I know, then I get bored very easily. So that was one of the main drivers why I got back to business school. And at every point in my career, I got to some new areas. And then I was like, okay, I want to know more about it. I want to know more in depth about it. So that's why, for example, I started the product management. It's been very helpful for me, although I'm in the marketing, which is not only product, but also price and promotion and blah, blah, blah. But it was very interesting to see how the product itself can really make or break the success of a company. So that's very interesting. And then the other study I attended was the data-driven marketing. Although I am a performance marketeer at the core, I thought it was very important to go to business school to learn about how the business is looking at data and how a data-driven marketing can help, because it's not only about the performance marketing as in search, for example, you just activate it, etc. There's a lot more to it. And doing that really enabled me to talk to the higher management, to get them to see the importance of data, what it can bring to them, the value, the business value. And at the same time, I got a lot of very detailed information during that study on data itself, the data science elements. So I was really able to sit next to the data scientists and talk their language and say, okay, I want to have this. I know you can do this. Can you do something for me? And then they understood what I wanted to achieve. And so I could really do some great stuff for my clients. And that's why I very much love going to business schools, because you really go to the very core and at the same time to the very high strategic elements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think those are both such great areas to study. I mean, with the product, this ends up kind of having the DNA of your offer is in the product, and it will determine so much of what's going to happen in the marketing campaigns, or they need to fit together. And I love what you said too about getting the broader business perspective and getting outside of maybe a channel kind of perspective or just the online marketing perspective. I think it's so important to align these things, and also at a higher level that you can speak to the decision makers, and that everyone has a common goal, that we're not just pursuing for example, return on ad spend or something like that, but that we have a common view on why we're going to grow, and that's really cool.
Yeah, that's really, to me, an important element. I always try to align the business goals to the marketing goals, and that's not as easy as it sounds. And you would definitely say, oh, of course they want more revenue, so we're going to the ROAS, but that's not the totality of the story. You can go bankrupt in pursuing ROASes. So there is a lot to it, and I don't care if it's the client is a big company or a very small company, just a consultant, for example. They all have business goals, and they all need to understand what's driving my business and how can I really grow in this. So yeah, that's interesting aspect.
Definitely, and I think we can get back on the growth topic in some more detail later too. And I just want to talk about a couple more milestones along the way. So you co-launched Reprise Digital, and you were on board during and after the acquisition by IPG. So that's pretty amazing. What was that like? What were some big lessons from that time?
That was a very interesting time, and I think one of the main lessons that we got out of it was to collaborate. We highly collaborated. By the way, at the time with the co-launch, we were only with three. Okay. So we were the three musketeers, me, Peter, and Martin. We considered us really as the three musketeers, and we collaborated in a highly fashion with Google right from the start. They believed in us, and that's also why we could really grow, because they really supported us. Another element is that we were very much believers of supporting the business with because Reprise Media was and is a search marketing agency at the core. And what we brought to those companies was not only the results of the search marketing, but also really showing what's going on. Because the force of search marketing is that actually you can see what people are looking for, are triggered by, etc. And for me, the cool stuff was that we actually saw digital transformation happening right before our eyes. To give you an example, we had a company that sold sunglasses, glasses, lenses, etc. And their main competitor online was an e-commerce company that sold lenses as a niche. And they were eating away all their market share on the lenses. And they didn't have that in scope at all, because their main competitors were the other companies that were, or the other shops in the street, in the high streets, but not the small online niche e-commerces. And that's the very core of digital transformation. And we could really explain it like, look what's happening, you're being deteriorated, and they are shifting their companies thanks to those information. And that was something we learned along the way, to look very much beyond the conversions, but looking at what's happening really with your company. Yeah.
That's really cool, and I love what you say there about search in general too. It's so powerful that you can, the inherent nature of it, that you can see what people are searching for, and that you can target these keywords and see the volume on those and so on is really fascinating as well.
Yeah.
Now, also around that time, you switched from director level to board level. So, what's kind of the biggest change in your career at that point, in terms of responsibility or scope or what your day looks like?
Yeah, so before I went to the board, I had a career path where I co-launched Reprise Media. And then a few years after, I became the sidekick of the general manager of the digital agency of IPG, where I was responsible for another transformation, because at that time there was RTB coming, programmatic, there was Facebook advertising also coming, and those were all new digital areas at that time. In the digital media plans, and my role was to really make sure that the media plans for those companies were strategically interesting enough to really grow via digital. And then after that, I was asked to go to the IPG level, at the media brands level. That's the
parent company, or the umbrella?
Yeah, the parent. That's the parent company, where I joined the strategic team, and then at that point I became also a member of the board. Now, my main role there was to really think about the digital transformation of media brands IPG in itself within Belgium, because funnily enough, we were discussing a lot with those companies, the clients. What's the digital transformation for you, etc. But we had to undergo our own digital transformation as well. And so that was my main role out there. Now, what changes a lot when you become member of the board is actually instead of having a view towards your clients, you become very much oriented inside. So you are looking at, how's the company doing? What's the revenue? What's the costs? What's the HR? So it's very much looking to yourself. And the danger is that you forget to look outside. So that's a main change.
Yeah, definitely. So at that point, you're then more working on your own business model, but that's got to connect back to the market, that external element.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And one thing that I picked out from there, you regarding this transformation that you led, you talked about exponential organizations. What is that model about exactly? Is that something like Google's 10x thinking? Is it in a different direction?
It's a very good question, because actually the Google 10x is part of an exponential organization. Let me explain. So the exponential organization is actually a model that Ismail Salim has been exploring. And he was wondering, okay, how or why better is a company like Google, Uber, etc., growing in such an exponential way? Because actually they're growing exponential. And they discovered a lot of elements that contribute to an organization to be capable to become exponential in growth. So there are some factors that are really looking to the outside world, and there are factors looking at the organization itself. And they are really explaining like, okay, there is one element you need an innovation, of course. And that's where Google 10x is part of it. So Google 10x is actually one of the methods that Google uses to think about innovation in an exponential way. So instead of Google X is saying, okay, instead of improving your product or service by 10%, let's factor it by 10. Because that forces you to go outside of the normal thinking and really push it to the end. But that's not the only thing why a Google, for example, is an exponential organization and capable to have this exponential growth. There is also the fact of having staff on demand, which is actually making use not only of your employees, but also making use of the total world. Because if you want to grow and grow fast, you need a lot of intelligence and a lot of brains.
Yeah.
So one of the elements is the innovation, but another element is also to have interfaces. You know, for example, Uber has an app, an interface where it's able to collect all the demands of, I want to have a taxi, and to be able to respond to it. If they wouldn't have had that, they would never have been able to grow, because, you know, let's say all the receptionists taking the calls, I want a cab, etc., won't be possible.
It wouldn't scale up like that.
No. And then there is an element of a dashboard. You need real-time dashboards, because otherwise, if you don't have them, you will not be able to see what's going on. If you grow so fast, the slightest change today makes a big difference. So you need those real-time dashboards. You need to nail those. You need to keep on doing some experiments. To have those growths. Algorithms is also an important, the Google bidding, the algorithm, that's a scaling element. If you don't make use of those, UPS, for example, they also made use of the algorithm to optimize the routes for the deliveries of the packages. Instead of just having one fixed route every day, the algorithm decides today your roadmap is going from A to Z to B, because that's the most efficient way to go. But then the day after, you might have a totally different route in your own region because you have other packages to deliver. And that's the algorithm doing for you. So it's all those elements together that make you being able to become an exponential organization. And then the Google X is one of those elements, because they make use of this innovation to think outside of the box and to think 10 times better instead of only linear 10% increase.
These are all really, really interesting points you raise. Like just, for example, about the dashboarding or the monitoring. I totally get your point. There's this 1 degree problem where, if you're flying a really long distance and you're pointing just 1 degree different, then you end up somewhere really different. And the thing about exponential growth is it's so fast. It's like something that we as humans can only poorly perceive or really perceive in hindsight.
Yeah.
So there's a chance that your organization is evolving away from you if you're not really on top of that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of people think that today's innovative companies are all about product innovation, etc. But only with this innovation you won't make it. And the interesting thing about the book is that once you've read it, that you see a lot of other books and models are really plugging into it.
Okay.
So that's it's really an explanation of what's going on today.
That's really cool. This reminds me of something, but maybe I'll ask it to you in a bit later. Just another milestone here. What prompted you to go freelance after this huge success that you had with Reprise, with IPG? I mean, were you just craving that Three Musketeers experience again, or how was it? Was it a little scary?
Maybe. No, it was not scary. Funnily enough, it was not scary. I was thinking about it already for a long time, and I've gotten to a point. If I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And it was very funny because, you get a lot of stress and then they say, oh, should I do it? Should I not do it? And then at some point, there was kind of a click in my head. I've made the decision and I became very calm. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And then the next day I was already sitting next to my accountant and checking, okay, what do I do and how do I do this, etc., etc. And then I became, very calm, and I just took some actions to make it happen. But it's certainly very exciting. I remember the first year is really a crazy year because a lot of things happen. You can't plan it. And but it was cool. I didn't regret it for one moment. No.
That's awesome. I really admire that. It takes a lot of guts to make a big change like that, and maybe in the moment it's just like, okay, don't overthink it. Let's just do this.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and one of the main drivers that got me to that decision was that as an employee, I've always been at the service of the company where I work for. And you try to help the company as much as possible with all you have as a capability. And of course, sometimes you also, in any case I do, I see some stuff, oh, you could do this could be very cool, or this could be bringing you a lot of revenue or whatever. But of course, not everybody thinks the same as you do. You're not always aligned. Sometimes an idea needs, I always say, an idea needs some massaging or some sowing the seeds. It needs time to grow. And actually, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I want to decide for myself. I'm going to do it. So that's also one of the drivers where I have this in my mind. I want to do this. I'm going to do this for my company. And that's the cool thing today. If I have an idea, I want to do this, then I can do it. Now, time is another element today.
Yeah, of course. But I totally get that. It's like being a studio director where everything is decision by committee versus being like a auteur director or something like this. It's totally different.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can imagine that. But now it's kind of on the other side of that. So you mentioned that you're working for a big pharmaceutical retailer right now, and if I'm not mistaken, you're head of digital advertising, but you're also in this freelancer consulting role. So What is that like then when you're in a non-permanent capacity at a company? And like it sounds like then maybe because you've got to deal with their stakeholders as well. So you have this level of power or self-autonomy, let's say, as a freelancer, as a consultant. But then how does that interaction work with the client company?
Yeah, always you have an assignment, right? As a consultant, and the assignment is pretty clear on two sides. Bring the digital advertising to a next level, and the other is bring the team to the next level. And once those two are done, it's never done, but at a certain point where we both want it to be, then my assignment is successful, and then I move on to the other assignment. So that is a pretty clear role for both of us, actually. And I find it pretty I find it very interesting because the role is very clear. Grow both the humans and the marketing approach, and hence the company. And there is no conflict, because if my team grows and if they are at some point able to take my role, I'm very happy, because that's what I want.
Definitely.
So I'm really pushing them, like, okay, go and grow, etc. And sometimes if you are really an employee, you might not like it, because that maybe becomes a threat to your own role. So for me, it's more pure to work in a manner like that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because normally in like succession planning or in building up in development paths for employees, there could potentially be this conflict. So that's a cool way of looking at it. And you're focusing on in-housing. That's, as you mentioned, building up the team and helping them along the way. So what are benefits of in-housing, or what obstacles do you see as standing in the way?
The advantage is that you bring the senior experience. So you have the capability to think beyond. You have a strategy that's being built. And then in-housing this capability is also enabling or ensuring yourself that implementation is being done. Is being done correctly or whatever. Because the challenge is not really in creating the strategy. Once you have somebody that has the capability to build a strategy, you can bring that in the company. But the real challenge is in having this implemented. And implementing a strategy it doesn't take 2 weeks. It takes a lot longer to really implement it, because it's not only about just activating a campaign. It's also about thinking differently. It's also about building different procedures to make it happen. One example is, instead of just building every campaign again and again and again and having the time and the effort of all the peoples to build a campaign, then go on to the next, you could structure yourselves differently and say, okay, let's pre-think the year. What will probably happen in summer? You will probably have good weather, so this type of product will probably sell better. Probably it will get colder, etc. You could already prepare all those campaigns and then just launch them whenever the good weather comes along. You're much more agile, faster, and then you can scale much faster, So it's not only about activating and pushing buttons, it's a lot more the strategy implementation.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because strategy can be, it can go in a too visionary direction. It needs to be anchored, it needs to be actionable, it needs to in the end get executed on, and that's where it's the messy middle right there.
Voila. Yeah. And I like to get into the messy middle as well, because I really like to get my feet in the mud and really solve the things, etc. It's one of the things that if clients choose from me, it's most of the times because they know, okay, there is a strategic vision, but there's also the capability of making it happen, and the never give up mentality. And that's the difference between another consultant that's more focused on just delivering a strategy and then moving on to the other.
Mm-hmm. The title of this podcast is, Digital Momentum, the Retail Growth Podcast. So getting down to it, how would you define growth, or what does good growth look like to you? How do you identify unhealthy growth, for example?
There is a lot of ways to look at it, but if you look at it from the business perspective, the economical perspective, of course, growth and revenue on itself is not the main parts. There is also the margin where you really earn the money, right? Mm-hmm. That's what's left at the end of the year. And that's an important element to take into consideration, because that's what the companies that's what makes the companies grow. I'm not a big fan, but that's really a personal opinion on investing and going to a startup and then depend on investment budgets, because that's probably a big risk to take. So I'm more on the side of just have a good and great idea, make it work small, earn the money and grow. And then after a point, you can maybe have some investment money. But I think your business model in itself with the growth and the growth margin should really be okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think right now there are a lot of businesses out there that are running on investment budget, for example, or venture mm-hmm. capital, and whether it's direct-to-consumer brands that are often, it's not really clear if there's a sustainable business logic there in the long run, or there are marketplace models where they're pushing super hard on growing their gross merchandise volume, basically just the size of the marketplace, and they're less concerned in the first place about the profitability because they first need to achieve this certain mass.
Yeah,
makes it really hard then for other advertisers to coexist, because it's a different goal that those companies have. I don't want to say that it's reckless or anything. They've got their reasons for doing that, but then it feels reckless for someone else who is in the same advertising environment and they're just trying to be profitable.
Yeah, there is another way. There is, what you mentioned is actually buying the market share. So the first goal is really to go out there to have scale in your revenues, in your sales, and to make sure you have a certain amount of clients to then thrive to. It's a choice, but I don't like that choice so much, but that's a personal opinion.
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think one thing I find a little ironic, I often think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs when it comes to these topics, and you'll have a performance marketing team, for example, and they're measuring revenue, and you talk to them about, well, let's move on to profit instead, or toward margin, and they talk about that like, well, let's just get the revenue straightened first, and then we'll move on to that next thing, because it's like, first, I need to have my basic needs met, and then I can talk about some more advanced needs. But what makes it ironic is that profit would actually be the more core need, and it's being neglected, because it's like focusing on being clothed and fed, but with revenue, maybe it's just soda that you're drinking, and what you need is protein and vitamins. So I see sometimes a contradiction there.
Yeah, true. And we as marketeers tend maybe to forget that the marketing in itself is not the only factor in a positive growth. There is a very important element, which is the pricing. Having the pricing right can make a world of a difference for your business model. So yeah, again, if you tie together not only marketing, but then the business needs, how your business model is locked in, and having all that right, it's super fascinating.
Yeah, this gets back to that topic of like, understanding the product management side, also aligning with the purchasing teams, and just getting a bigger picture on the business besides just these marketing channels. It's a great point.
Absolutely.
One thing that I'm also wondering, you were talking about the exponential organization, and that this framework kind of describes the world that we live in. And I know that you've often focused on change management, and when knowing that we're living in this kind of exponential world, or this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, seeing what happened last year with COVID, I would make a statement that at this point, all management is change management. Do you agree or disagree? How do you see it?
Yeah, I agree. In a way, I agree. Yeah. When I look back at last year, I've seen literally all my clients, and in extension, all companies being in change. Everybody. Either the demand has stopped completely because you had to stop your business, but there were other companies that had changed in a total different way, where they were really bombarded by demands.
Yeah.
So, they were thrown into the exponential growth without really even willing to do so.
Yep.
So they on all sides there was change, and you had to change, because if your demand stops or decreases a lot, you need to start rethinking, okay, how can I find demands? Do I have to tweak my business? Do I have to tweak my product/services? Do I need to really pivot or slightly alter it? The other companies where they had exponential demand, they had to quickly, overnight, but really overnight, in 24 hours, they really needed to change the way they handle the logistics, the way they handle the product supply, because if they didn't do so, they would just not survive, etc., etc. So yeah, it was total change.
Yeah, totally. We had clients, for example, in booking, where their businesses were really challenged overnight, and we had other clients where they had to shut down their campaigns because their website was breaking because they couldn't handle the volume. And so, yeah, totally.
Yeah. What I also think is that the change is also a lot at the human side. It's because us, the humans, actually, that the companies could make it. What I found really fascinating is that, so the governments decided to shut down and go into quarantine, etc., overnight, and then all of a sudden, the day after, you are in a totally different world. Yeah. All of a sudden, you're managing your clients, your business, your campaigns, your whatever you do in your work, you had to do it from home. And then all the people that I see around me, they just did it.
Yeah.
And they did an amazing job. Every one of them, partners, colleagues, you name it, everybody I know, friends, neighbors, everybody did a tremendous job. And that's what I really found very fascinating. And what I maybe learned as well is that if you do change, sometimes it also helps to be very abrupt about the change and not being too gentle about it, and say, okay, we're gonna change this procedure and we're gonna change it as of tomorrow. There will be some time needed to adapt yourselves, but you're gonna make it. We've seen it.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think humans have this remarkable ability for resilience, and I think the team spirit that really was manifest was amazing under those circumstances. I mean, I think there's two approaches. The other is to move really slow and over communicate and so on. But it sort of depends, because it depends on the cadence of change that's rolling out. But I think definitely there's a case to be made that sometimes you should just go for it.
Absolutely.
What do you see as next in digital marketing? Which trends are you watching right now? Any popular themes or strategies that you feel are underhyped or overhyped?
In terms of strategy, I think we shouldn't forget to remember the basics. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes there is a strategy that's overhyped, like in choice of channels. You need to go to TikTok, you need to go to whatever. It depends. It always depends, because, the good old Kotler, for those who remember him, he had the four P's, which is the product, the place, the price, the promotion. Actually, you need to have those right. And you need to know your audiences, you need to know what triggers them, etc. And then understanding everything about that, then you can make a very wise choice. Do I need to integrate, for example, the TikTok in the channel mix? Yes or no? Does it make sense for us? Yes or no? But if you just make choices based on hypes, on what you see everybody's doing X or Y, then you are really detached on what you as a company want to achieve.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's, to me, I always look at interest in, okay, what's happening, what are people doing, to stick to the example of TikTok, what are they doing over there, and then how does it work? To understand, okay, how can I use it? Should I use it or not, etc. But really linking all the time back.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because trends can they can to a certain extent be noise, or they can just impact us because of all these human biases like recency or fear of missing out, whatever. And yeah, if you're working on nailing your fundamentals and you've got a strategy in place, then you can ask, okay, this is really bright and shiny, it's catching my attention, but does it match back to the strategy in the end?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the cool thing about hypes is that it always has the same curve.
The hype loop, yeah.
Yeah, is it Gartner?
I think it's Gartner. I think it's Gartner. Yeah, I love watching these.
Voila, me too. Because for everything, whether it's a channel or technology or whatever, you can always see there is a big hype, and that's going exponentially high, and then at some point it goes flat, and then sometimes it falls back, or it keeps on growing. And then those things that fall back, those are the ones that are overhyped.
Yeah, definitely. I can recommend anyone, Gartner, check out their hype loops. I've got them for a number of technologies and topics. Yeah, maybe I think we're getting a little tight on time here. So if I can ask you just one last question. What, getting back to this core theme of growth, so what do you see as the workforce skills and cultural attributes, since you've talked about how important humans are in this equation? What are these kind of workforce skills that digital companies need to outpace the market?
That's a very good last question.
too big for a last question.
Let me think about that for one moment.
Sure.
I think what is really important is to get the people on board. So whatever you want to do, big growth, small growth, you need to have them on board. And that's a continuous communication back and forth, and explaining what you want to do, and then getting them also involved in how do you think we could achieve this goal. So that the human, it always comes back to them, are very important. And then there is two other elements. There is the support of the management, the higher management, that's really needed, because the people need to feel okay, this is where they want to grow. This is what we need to be able to do it. But we feel the backup and the support of the higher management to really make it happen. Yeah. That's the magic. And then, of course, the processes and what I've been mentioning, having the right information in this area of digital marketing. Surely it is the dashboards, to have them, to have some processes, to think about, okay, how can we be more efficient in realizing what we do need to realize, and stop thinking of, we've always done it like this, so we keep on continuing to do it like that, because in this VUCA world, nothing is certain and everything changes along the way. So you need to keep on rethinking, how do I do it? And should I keep on doing it the same way, or should we adapt it a little bit and automate, of course?
I think that's really great advice to end on, and I want to thank you for your time today, Birgit. So one last question: is there anything that you want to? Is there anything that you want to plug or promote? I guess your podcast isn't out yet, but.
No, and we're really excited because this afternoon we're gonna think of a name. So.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, but if you want to connect with me, you can always connect with me on the LinkedIn, which is just simply the Birgit de Vries. My company is named Golfbreker, which is in English actually breakwater. So cool. Translated into Google, Golfbreker.digital. That's where you can find me.
All right. Thanks again, Birgit, and have a really great day.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Join us next time for an interview with Christopher Gutknecht, Lead Acquisition and Optimization at Bergzeit.